The Alchemist tells the story of a young shepherd named Santiago who, while resting in an abandoned church where a tall sycamore tree grew, dreamt of a treasure that a boy had told him could be found in the pyramids of Egypt. It was a dream he had had before. Eager to learn more about this dream, Santiago seeks the advice of an old gypsy who tells him to go forth and seek the treasure. Santiago then meets a mysterious old man who seemed to know Santiago's life story, including the treasure he had dreamt of. The old man claimed he was the king of Salem, and his purpose was to guide and encourage men to fulfill their personal legends. The old man declares that Santiago's personal legend was to find the treasure. He educates Santiago about omens and how to look for them, and as a parting gift, gives him 2 stones, Urim and Thummim, and says that they would help Santiago interpret the omens. So, Santiago sells his sheep, leaves Andalusia, and journeys to Africa. When he reaches Tangier, a man approaches him and promises to take him to the pyramids. Alas, this man was a thief and runs off with all of Santiago's money. Santiago then comes across a crystal shop where he works for several months. He decides that once he earns enough money, he will head home instead and become a shepherd again. But soon the business grew, and having earned more than enough, decided it was time for him to go back home. However, he changes his mind at the last minute and decides to go to the pyramids. Santiago joined a caravan that was headed for Egypt. While waiting, he met an Englishman who was going to Al Fayoum Oasis to see an alchemist. An alchemist was a person who had studied and understood the language of the world and had the ability to create a philosopher's stone, a substance with which could turn any metal into gold, and the elixir of life, a liquid that when drank could cure many illnesses and enable the alchemist to live a very long life. Upon reaching the oasis, Santiago meets the love of his life, Fatima, who momentarily makes him want to abandon his mission of finding the treasure. However, Fatima urges him to continue and assures him that she will wait for him. While contemplating, Santiago bears witness to 2 hawks flying in the sky. He knows immediately that it was an omen that the oasis will be attacked. He runs to the tribal chieftain to give his warning. As he leaves, he is confronted by a veiled man who points a sword to him. The man was sitting atop a horse. However, Santiago feels no fear. The man withdraws his sword and reveals that he is the alchemist. The oasis is indeed attacked, and Santiago is rewarded. The alchemist tells him that he must continue his journey and offers to ride with him across the desert. However, they were held captive by some warriors who thought they were spies. To buy them some time, the alchemist declares that Santiago had the ability to turn himself into the wind. They were given 3 days to do this. Santiago was in panic as he had no idea how to do the impossible task of becoming the wind. The alchemist merely says that Santiago will find a way. On the 3rd day, Santiago communicates with the wind, the sun, and the heavens. The wind then blows so hard that the warriors could no longer see Santiago. They were set free. The alchemist eventually tells Santiago that he had to return to the oasis and that Santiago must now travel alone. Santiago reaches the pyramids and begins to dig, but finds no treasure. Thieves then appear to rob him of his gold. They order him to continue as they thought that Santiago may have hidden more money in the sand. However, morning came, and still no treasure was seen. The thieves then began beating Santiago until he was bleeding. In desperation, Santiago tells him of his dream. Before leaving, one of the thieves stopped to tell him that he once had a recurring dream of a treasure as well. In his dream, the treasure was located beneath a church where a sycamore tree grew. Santiago returns to Andalusia, armed with the knowledge of where to find his treasure. Paulo Coelho was astonished when he received a call from HarperCollins, an American publisher, who raved about his book, The Alchemist. They told him that they were going to translate it into English. Soon, the book was translated not just into English, but 55 other languages. Millions of people have congratulated him on his work and told him that they had read his book. In fact, more than 20 million copies have been sold. He was often asked what the secret to his success was, and Paulo Coelho was unable to answer. He didn't know. All he knew was that people ought to be aware of their personal calling. A personal calling was a man's purpose on earth. It is the one thing that, once achieved, can give the greatest sense of fulfillment. However, he warned of 4 obstacles that one may face in the pursuit of his or her personal calling. Sadly, most people abandon their life's purposes because life and other things get in the way. The first obstacle occurred in childhood. It is when people discourage us and say that pursuing our life's purpose cannot be done. As such, we grow up with fear and guilt. The second obstacle was love. Here people would often settle down and forget their personal calling because they were afraid to leave their loved ones behind and hurting them in the process. However, the author believes that if the love is true, they would understand and urge us to pursue our personal calling, and perhaps even accompany us to achieve it. The third obstacle is fear of failure. The road to our personal calling is not an easy one, according to the author. We will be faced with defeats, loss, and grievances. Most people, when encountering this, decide not to continue with their journey because they begin to feel that it is no longer worth it. However, what they fail to realize is that defeats are necessary because they help us grow stronger, thus giving us more personal confidence to pursue our life's purpose, making that personal calling even more enticing. The fourth and final obstacle is the fear of realizing our dream. This is where we are engulfed with guilt about achieving our life's purpose, guilt on whether we deserve it when so many people around us have not realized theirs. According to the author, this was the most dangerous obstacle as we are deceived that by giving up, we are doing a saintly act. After all, we are foregoing our personal desire so we could give joy to others. But Paulo Coelho urges that we should deem ourselves deserving of our reward once our personal calling is achieved because we fought so hard to realize it. The story begins with our hero, a young shepherd named Santiago, who had taken respite in an abandoned church, or what was left of it. There was a tall sycamore tree that had grown where the altar once stood, and this was where Santiago decided to sleep. The floor was cold and most of the roof had been destroyed, but Santiago didn't mind. He was a nomad, and he had gotten used to finding whatever shelter he could find along the way. He made sure that all 60 of his sheep were securely inside so none of them would wander during the night. Santiago chose to be a shepherd because he wanted to travel the world. In his younger years, his parents had sent him to school in hopes that he would become a priest. However, this was not what Santiago wanted. When he finished school, he begged his father to allow him to explore the rest of the world. His father had tried to convince him to stay, but Santiago could not be swayed. His father eventually relented, gave him his blessing to leave, and set him on his way. Before he left, Santiago noticed a yearning to travel reflected in his father's eyes, a yearning that had been buried, and he knew that his father understood. 2 years had passed then, and during this time, Santiago learned a great deal about being a shepherd. He knew every one of his sheep and could easily tell how they were feeling. He noticed a connection had formed between him and his flock, as they did his bidding with minimal prodding. He also learned a lot about Andalusia, where to find the best pasture, and how to negotiate for the best prices for wool and sheep. One of the most unforgettable trade he had was one of the villages he went to the previous year. A dry goods merchant had asked him for wool and wanted Santiago to shear it in front of him to make sure that he got his money's worth. The merchant had to attend to something else first, and Santiago decided to pass the time by reading. It was then that the merchant's daughter had approached him, surprised that a shepherd knew how to read. He explained how he learned, and then began telling her the stories of the books he's read, and eventually regaled her with stories of his travels. At that moment, Santiago wished that his turn to shear his sheep never comes, but alas, the time came. He handed the wool over to the merchant and went on his way. Santiago was on his way back to the village and was filled with anticipation and nervousness as he thought about meeting the merchant's daughter again. He wondered whether the girl had forgotten about him or perhaps had already gotten married. He tried to convince himself that this did not matter, but he knew deep down that it did. Santiago looked up at the stars through the destroyed roof and eventually drifted to sleep. He had a familiar dream that night, a dream that he had been having a few days now. In this dream, a young boy had played with his sheep, and when Santiago confronted him, the boy took him to the pyramids and informed him that there would find treasure there. However, just as the boy would point where exactly it was, Santiago would wake up. Intrigued, Santiago decided to find a gypsy as soon as he arrived at the village so he could ask for his dream to be interpreted. He was a bit hesitant, however, as he was mistrustful of gypsies. After all, he had grown up hearing stories about them and their evil deeds. However, he felt that he had no other choice. He needed to find that treasure. He found a gypsy woman in the village who fell into silence as she looked in his palms. She took quite some time before saying anything, and Santiago was about to change his mind when the gypsy woman mentioned the treasure. She added that should he be able to find it, to give him 1/10 of it, and she would not charge him anything. Santiago was surprised and asked for more information, however, was disappointed when she could offer no more. Frustrated, Santiago went to find a new book instead. He sat down in one of the benches in the park and began to read. As he concentrated on this book, an old man sat down next to him and forced him into conversation. Reluctantly, Santiago responded, even though he wanted very much to be left alone. However, the old man revealed that he had read the same book and found it irritating. The boy's interest was piqued, and he probed further as to what the old man meant, and decided that if the book was indeed bad, at least he would still be able to change it for another. The old man said that the book was just like all the other books here, telling people the world's greatest lie, that fate had control of our lives and not us. He elaborated that people often grow accustomed to their daily lives, that they forgo pursuing their dreams or personal legend. The old man then suddenly asked him for 1/10 of his sheep, and in exchange, he would help Santiago find the treasure. Santiago was aghast that the old man knew about his dream and really looked at him this time. He noted that the old man was dressed like an Arab, and even though that for a moment he saw a flash of something bright in the old man's chest, however, just as quickly, the old man adjusted his clothing and it was gone. He was writing something in the sand, and Santiago was awed when he saw what was written. The names of the people that Santiago held close to his heart, his family, and the name of the girl he liked. Santiago offered the man 1/10 of the treasure instead. The old man warned him that he should never promise to give something that he doesn't have yet, as this will lessen his determination to work hard for it. Further intrigued, Santiago finally asked the old man who he was, to which he later replied that he was king of Salem, and that he was the force that helps people fulfill their personal legends. He went on to say that he was there because Santiago was about to give up on his. The old man then shared that once he helped a miner who had pursued his personal legend and abandoned everything to find emeralds. The miner searched and searched to no avail, and at the brink of giving up, the old man turned himself into a stone and placed himself in the miner's way. The miner threw the stone away with such force that the rock had struck it and opened up to reveal the elusive emerald that the miner had been searching for in the last 5 years. Soon after, the old man left, and Santiago pondered on what they had discussed. He eventually realized that to find the treasure, he needed to give up his sheep, and since his family is used to him not being around, he decided that they wouldn't be missed very much if he decided to pursue his personal legend. The next day, Santiago brought 6 sheep and met the old man in the park. He told the old man that he had sold the rest of his sheep to a friend. Santiago admitted that he was surprised that his friend bought all 54 of them. The old man then explained that what happened is the principle of favorability and is often termed as beginner's luck, because a force wants to fuel our desire to pursue our personal legend. He further added that if you put your mind into getting something, the universe conspires you to have it. Before he sent Santiago on his way, the old man pulled out 2 stones, one white and one black, from the golden breastplate he was wearing round his neck, and instructed Santiago to use them when he was unable to read omens. The stones were called Urim and Thummim. The old man instructed that he should be on the lookout for omens as they were put in his way as God's way to guide him as he pursues his personal legend. However, he cautioned that Santiago should try to make decisions on his own as much as possible, and not to rely so much on these stones. He then went on to tell a story about a boy whose father had asked him to seek a wise man and find the secrets of happiness. The boy traveled far and soon he came across a beautiful castle where the wise man lived. He waited to get an audience with the wise man, and when his turn came, he asked what the secret of happiness was. Instead of answering him, the wise man asked the boy to explore the castle and to bring with him a spoonful of oil. He was told to make sure that none of it drops along the way. The boy followed, but upon his return to the wise man, he was unable to recall what the castle looked like as he was too focused on making sure that no oil was spilled. The wise man was disappointed and asked the boy to go around the castle once more. This time, the boy took note of everything he passed along the way and marveled at the beautiful things he saw, but alas, when he returned to the wise man, the spoon was empty. From there, the wise man gave the boy his answer and said that the secret to happiness was to be able to see all the wonders of the world, but at the same time, not to forget the drops of oil in the spoon. Santiago thanked the man for his advice, and with his pocket full of money, set out on his way. He arrived in Africa, at a port in Tangier, and took respite in a bar. Santiago observed differences in the daily life of the city, there as compared to Andalusia, and realized he had a problem. The main language spoken there was Arabic, and he didn't know how to speak it. As he thought about what to do next, a man approached him and spoke Spanish. Santiago was relieved to find someone he could speak to, and regarded this man as a new friend. He asked whether this man could take him to see the pyramids. The man agreed, given that Santiago assured him that he had enough money to get there. As Santiago was showing his money to his new friend, the bartender suddenly grabbed him and shouted angry words that he could not comprehend. This new friend pickpocketed the money, pulled Santiago, and together they ran out into the busy marketplace. As they walked, Santiago became distracted by a beautiful sword and asked his friend to inquire the price. However, no response was coming. It was then Santiago realized that he had been robbed, and realized too late that the bartender earlier was probably trying to warn him about the man. Santiago's heart fell. Miserably, he remembered how everything was different from just a few hours ago. As he contemplated his dismissal situation, he remembered the stones that the old man had given him. He decided to ask if the old man's blessing was with him, and the stones answered yes, and Santiago was strangely comforted with the answer. He decided not to dwell on what had happened and instead focus on his adventure ahead. He woke the next day to the marketplace coming to life. He perceived his surroundings with renewed vigor and optimism and observed the people around him. As he set forth to find a way to go to Egypt, he came across a crystal shop atop a hill. The owner of the crystal shop was reminiscing the days when his shop was well known and many customers from all parts of the world came to buy from him. However, as time went by, more shops appeared at the hillside and sales plummeted. After all, nobody was going to bother to climb the hill when there were already shops at the foot of it. Santiago broke the crystal shop owner out his reverie by suddenly asking if he could work for him. The shop owner did not reply, and taking this as a cue, Santiago began cleaning some of the crystals. As he worked, 2 customers entered the shop. Santiago finished cleaning the crystals and asked for food. The shop owner decided to have lunch with him, and it was here that Santiago revealed that he needed money to get to Egypt. The shop owner laughed and said that even if he were to work for many years in the shop, he would not be able to earn enough money to go to Egypt as it was miles away. The shopkeeper noted the light go out of Santiago's eyes and gently added that he could earn enough to go home if Santiago would work for him. It was then Santiago realized that everything he had held on to pursue the treasure suddenly seemed so far away, like a distant memory, and he wondered whether it was worth still pursuing given the dire situation he was in. After a deep silence, Santiago said that he needed the money, but it was to buy sheep. A month had gone by and Santiago was still working at the shop. Business was better than ever, and the shop owner was really happy about this. He figured that the turnaround was probably due to Santiago's presence. In return, he gave Santiago high commission. One day, an idea suddenly formed in Santiago's mind. To attract more customers, why not build a display case? He brought his idea to the shop owner. However, the latter, not liking change and preferring that things stay as they are, asked Santiago why they should bother doing so as business was good. Santiago responded that they should take advantage that luck was on their side. To veer the topic away from the display case, The shop owner asked Santiago why he wanted so much to see the pyramids. Santiago did not reveal his dream and instead said it was because he had heard of them. The shop owner did not understand why Santiago would go all the way to cross the vast desert just to see the pyramids, which were just a pile of stones in his opinion. Santiago remarked that the shop owner probably never dreamed of traveling, implying that this was the reason why the latter could not understand him. However, that night the shop owner sat down with Santiago and revealed that his dream was to go to Mecca. His religion entailed that at least once in their lives they traveled to the sacred city. He narrated how he had seen many people pass by on their way there, people from all walks of life, some very wealthy, and some even poorer than him going. He explained that he knew what Santiago felt. However, unlike him, the shop owner was content with only dreaming of Mecca. Only dreaming about it gave him the strength to get up every day, as it gave him something to look forward to. He acknowledged that Santiago, on the other hand, wanted to realize his dream and not merely fantasize about it. With that, the shop owner gave his permission to build the case display. The display attracted more customers, much to the delight of the shop owner and Santiago. Santiago figured that if sales would continue to be this high, he would be able to save up enough to not just buy 60 sheep, as he had before, but even double it. He now felt accomplished and proud of what he had learnt so far, and the fact that he now knew how to speak Arabic. Santiago no longer felt like a stranger in Tangier, and felt confident that just as he mastered being a shepherd, and now crystal trading, he felt like he could do anything. As he was thinking about all this, he suddenly noticed a man remarking how great it would be if there was some refreshments available at the top of the hill, given the arduous climb to get there. Santiago perceived this as another omen, and off he went to the shop owner to propose that they begin selling tea using crystal glasses. The shop owner, however, did not share his enthusiasm and said that offering tea would mean better business, but he did not want to change anything and was happy with how things were. Santiago added that by selling tea, their profits would increase even further, which meant he could buy his sheep much sooner, and the shop owner could now go to Mecca. The shop owner realized that the boy was making him see the things that he could accomplish. Admittedly, he didn't like change, but to ignore blessings and good omens was said to bring bad luck. The shop owner smoked his hookah and sat in silence. When the sun set, he got up and told Santiago that they could sell tea in crystal glasses. The idea was a huge success, and more customers flocked in the shop with each passing day. More money flowed in, and soon, the shop owner had to import both bags of tea and crystals. Passers-by were impressed by the ingenuity of selling tea in crystal glasses. The beauty of these pieces caught their eyes, and they would buy crystal after drinking their tea. Soon the shop owner hired 2 more employees to cater for the growing number of customers that the shop was receiving. More months passed by, and at this time Santiago had more than enough money to buy double the size of his flock and still have some left. He knew deep down the time had come for him to be on his way. He dressed himself and smoked his hookah as he contemplated what to do next. At last he went to find the shop owner to bid farewell. The shop owner was not surprised. He knew this time would come. He thanked the boy for the blessings he had brought upon him in the shop. Santiago thanked the shop owner as well for the months that they had worked together. It was then that Santiago realized that the shop owner somehow reminded him of the old king. He told the shop owner that he could now go to Mecca, while him, on the other hand, could now buy sheep. However, the shop owner only smiled and said that he will not be going to Mecca, the same way that he knew that Santiago was not going to buy sheep. Santiago was surprised by this answer, and the shop owner merely said, "Maktub," which meant, "it is written." Santiago left the shop and set out for the port deep in thought. He settled in the same bar he had gone to when he first arrived in Tangier. He debated whether to go back home and become a shepherd once more, or cross the desert and go to the pyramids. However, he realized that being a shepherd or a crystal merchant was something that he could always go back to. Yet, there he was already 2 hours closer to his destination. Making up his mind, he thought of hitching a ride with the suppliers that crossed the desert. These suppliers were the ones who used to bring tea to the crystal shop. Santiago reached the supplier's warehouse, and when he entered, he saw an Englishman engrossed in a book. He attempted to make conversation, but the Englishman seemed reluctant to engage in small talk. Therefore, Santiago sat in the corner and opened the book he had tried to read in Spain months ago. A few minutes later, he decided he did not want to, as seemed rude as the Englishman appeared, so he stopped reading and instead took out Umen and Thumen. He recalled the words that the old king had once said to him. While deep in thought, he was startled when the Englishman suddenly exclaimed that he recognized the stones. The Englishman indeed recognized the stones because he believed in omens. He had devoted his entire life to understanding the world and the universal language. At that moment, he was studying alchemy. He had sought truths and answers to many questions, but had come to a point where he was unable to discover anything further. He wanted to learn more about the Philosopher's Stone, but no matter how he tried, he could not understand why the alchemists he'd met refused to divulge their secrets on how to make it. He had tried to search for the answers in books and spent all his fortune in purchasing rare volumes regarding the subject to no avail. He was about to give up when a friend of his returned from an expedition and excitedly revealed that he had met a true alchemist who lived in Al Fayoum oasis. The Englishman wasted no time and packed up all his belongings, cancelled his appointments, and set off for Egypt. Santiago asked how the Englishman had come to know about the stones. The Englishman explained that they were mentioned in the Bible, and back then, priests wore breastplates that contained these stones. Buoyed by happiness that he met the Englishman who shared his perception on omens and the universal language, Santiago revealed his reason for wanting to cross the desert, and in turn, the Englishman mentioned that he was there to find an alchemist. Just then, an Arab entered and announced that there was a caravan going to Egypt and motioned for them to go outside. The leader of the caravan was speaking to the crowd that had gathered outside, giving instructions and warning everyone about the treacherous expedition ahead. He warned that the journey can be dangerous but swore to protect them no matter the costs and get them safely to their destination. Santiago and the Englishman were given camels each and they securely tied their belongings to them. They mounted the camels and the caravan moved at the sound of the bugle. Santiago observed the movement of the caravan and noticed that when they had first set out, everything was too noisy, children crying, animals restlessly moving about in cages, and loud conversations between the men and women. However, as the days wore on, everything and everyone felt silent. One of the camel drivers remarked that this usually happens because the desert is so vast and impressive that it makes people realize how small they truly are. Despite this simple explanation, Santiago knew instinctively what the camel driver meant. Sometimes when you are in the presence of something impressive, you get so awed with it that you are rendered speechless. Santiago was excited that his intuition made him understand the camel driver better, and he recalled what his mother used to call them, hunches. He realized this must be something that was universally understood by all people and connected them. The desert was not just all sand, Santiago observed, but there were rocky in some areas. Boulders would sometimes block their way and they had to go around it. They also passed dried-up lakes, and because there was salt left behind, the camels had a hard time walking through as the salt would dig into their hooves. Despite the treacherous paths, they would always travel in the direction of the morning star. If they had to take a detour, Santiago noticed that they would be led back to the path where the star could be seen shining ahead. Santiago made friends with the camel driver, and one night the camel driver shared his life story. He had an orchid, a wife and kids. Life was good, and he had been able to fulfill his obligation to Allah and went to Mecca. However, one day the Nile overflooded and flooded all of the crops. It was a terrible time, and he recalled that everyone had been afraid that they would also lose their lives. However, the disaster passed, but in its wake, left everything in ruins. He had to find another way to earn a living, hence he became a camel driver. He realized at that moment that sometimes we are so afraid of losing our worldly possessions that we fail to understand that all things happen for a reason. As they made their way deeper into the desert, Santiago noticed that sometimes hooded men would appear and give updates whether the caravan route was safe. They were called Bedouins, and they were tasked to look out for any danger, so they would ride ahead of the caravan. One night, they brought worrying news. Tribal wars were happening in some parts of the desert. Santiago could smell fear in the air, and the Englishman asked whether they were in any danger. The camel driver responded that they were already in the middle of the desert. Hence, if there was any danger, the only way to move was forward. The nights that followed were quiet. No more conversations occurred round the bonfire that they made every night. In fact, the caravan leader instructed that they stop making fires altogether so they would not attract any attention. They also began sleeping in a circle with their animals lined around them. Sentinels were placed around strategically to ensure that someone was always keeping an eye while everyone was sleeping. The Englishman beckoned to Santiago one night as he was unable to sleep. They walked along the encampment, and here Santiago shared his life story. Once he was done, the Englishman remarked that he found the part where the crystal shop grew when Santiago worked there fascinating. He explained that this was the principle that governed all things, that people were closest to the soul of the world when they want something with all their heart. He even further elaborated that all things on earth had a soul, whether living or not, and said that even the thought has one as well. The Englishman said that everything was part of one's soul, and we grow and evolve because the earth was alive. Santiago pondered the Englishman's words, and in turn, he shared his observations of their journey through the desert so far. Santiago shared that he feels the desert was allowing the caravan to cross, but testing it every step of the way. Both men realized that they had made it thus far because they understood the language of the world, and they each made a promise. Santiago to read more books, and the Englishman to pay more attention to the caravan and the desert. Santiago found the books strange, mentioning things he had not heard of, such as names of different chemicals, kings, and dragons. However, he noticed that one idea was repeatedly mentioned in the book, that everything was a manifestation of one thing only. He recalled a book he once read that mentioned the emerald tablet, and on it was inscribed some lines. These lines were regarded as most important texts in alchemy, which is why Santiago was puzzled why so many books existed on the subject. The Englishman explained that this was so one could understand the lines. Santiago found the book describing the work of different alchemists the most fascinating. He learned that they devoted their lives in doing the master's work, and their main goal was to discover the elixir of life and the philosopher's stone. The elixir of life was said to be liquid and had the ability to cure a myriad of illnesses. It also allowed the alchemist to have a very long life, while the philosopher's stone, a solid, had the ability to turn any metal into gold. Santiago was intrigued when he learned about the elixir of life and the philosopher's stone, but grew increasingly frustrated because the books he leafed through contained only complex instructions and coded texts. He asked the Englishman why it was so complicated to learn about the master's work, and the Englishman explained that this was intentionally done so only those with persistence and responsibility to learn could understand and achieve it. The world would go into chaos if everyone was able to transform everything into gold. When Santiago finally returned all of the books, the Englishman asked whether he had learned anything. Santiago responded that he had learned that one will be able to understand the language and the soul of the world, and eventually the masterwork, if he puts his mind to it. However, he believed that learning could be done more simply. The Emerald Tablet was proof that everything about alchemy could be summarized in just a few lines. The Englishman was disappointed that Santiago was not able to learn more, and he admitted that he too was unable to learn anything from observing the desert and the caravan. Santiago later realized that his way of learning is different from the Englishman, and there was nothing wrong with that. After all, they both had the same goal, that was to achieve their personal legend. Santiago decided that he would respect how the Englishman preferred to learn. As they neared their destination, the Bedouins visited more frequently and spoke with the caravan leader. They reported that the tribe wars had indeed begun. While everyone was filled with fear and apprehension, Santiago noticed that the camel driver he befriended was unperturbed, despite the worrying news. The camel driver explained that it is important to live only in the moment and not worry about the past or future, as we do not live in them. He added that concentrating on the present will make one happy. The caravan finally reached Al Fayoum Oasis. Santiago revealed in the sight before him and decided to take the camel driver's advice and only live in the present. He looked at the date palm trees around him and decided to push away the thoughts of Egypt and how far away it still was from his mind. Nearby, an alchemist observed the caravan that had just arrived. Having spent a long time in the oasis, the alchemist had seen many people come and go. He saw the tribal chiefs welcome the caravan leader and the men, women, and children pouring in excitedly. After having seen nothing but sand and sky, the alchemist understood that the oasis was a welcome sight for these people. The alchemist, however, had been given a mission. There was a man in the caravan that he had to teach his secrets. The omens had told him so. He hoped that this man, whoever he was, would prove to be equally capable or better than his previous apprentice. The alchemist wondered why he had to teach this man the secrets when God could easily show it to himself. However, he realized that there are some things that no words or pictures could ever describe. He needed to pass on the secrets so they would not be forgotten. Santiago was amazed at how vast the oasis was. It was even bigger than some of the towns in Spain. He also noticed that the people he had traveled with were livelier than they had been during the journey. Santiago asked the camel driver why the people in the oasis did not seem cautious about their safety, and the camel driver explained that this was because oases were places of refuge and were considered neutral territories. The caravan leader gathered everyone to announce that they were to stay in the oasis until further notice. He wanted to ensure that the tribal wars were over before they set off again, emphasizing that the safety of everyone was of the utmost importance. He asked everyone to surrender their arms, if any. The oasis had a rule that they would not shelter any armies. Since there was a law of hospitality that oasis dwellers followed, everyone was to be assigned tents that they will be sharing. Santiago's mind drifted back to the treasure, and he grew impatient at the slow progress he was making. He had encountered many obstacles along the way, and there have been many times his persistence and courage have been tested. He tried to remind himself not to be hasty, or he may miss the omens that God puts in his path. Just like what the camel driver said, there must be a reason for everything, and he should focus on the present and stop worrying about the future. Due to exhaustion, everyone slept almost immediately that night. Santiago shared a tent with 5 other men that were close to his age. In the morning, the Englishman appeared in the tent and asked for his help to find the alchemist. Santiago and the Englishman searched the oasis, but it was so large that by afternoon they were exhausted, but still did not know where the alchemist was. Eventually they decided to ask for help. However, no one recognized the alchemist. They decided to change the question because they figured that perhaps the word alchemist was foreign to the people in the oasis. Instead, they asked for a man who could cure illnesses. They reached a well, and Santiago saw a young woman approach. He decided to ask her. However, he stopped and he felt as though the world around him had halted. Within him, he felt the soul of the world, and an emotion so strong that it engulfed him. It was a language universally understood. Love. Santiago knew immediately that the omens had brought him to this moment, and he was looking into the eyes of the woman meant for him. He instinctively knew that the young woman shared his feelings. She understood. The Englishman shook Santiago out of his reverie and urged him to ask about the alchemist. He was brought back to his senses and asked for the girl's name. It was Fatima. Santiago asked where they could find the man that could cure illnesses. She pointed south and the Englishman left. The next day, Santiago waited by the well, hoping to meet Fatima again. When she arrived, Santiago asked her to be his wife. Fatima was stunned and dropped the vessel of water she was carrying. In the days that followed, Santiago and Fatima met, and they talked about their lives. Santiago told her about his personal legend, but was now hesitant about pursuing it since he had found out about Fatima. She was all that he needed. However, Fatima urged him to go on. She was a desert woman, and desert women are used to waiting for their men. She confessed she loved him and assured him that their love would endure. Santiago was heartbroken. He did not want to leave her, but deep down he knew she was right. He wandered for a moment, and he saw the Englishman was doing something strange. He had built a furnace, and there was a flask heating on top. Santiago left the Englishman to his work and walked to the edge of the oasis. As he looked out into the desert, he became aware of hawks flying above him. As he stared, he suddenly saw the hawks fighting. A vision flashed for a moment before him. Warriors and swords in the oasis. The desert was talking to him. The oasis was going to be attacked. Santiago tried to convince himself that his eyes were probably just playing tricks on him. He turned to go back and, on his way, saw a camel driver he befriended. Santiago quickly narrated what he saw. The camel driver understood what he was saying. He had known men who could see into the future. They were called seers, and people regarded them with reverence and fear. The camel driver remembered the day when he consulted one. The seer he consulted with, however, did not cast his twigs as he usually did. He told the camel driver that no one knows the future except God himself. Therefore, he didn't know what will happen, and he could only guess at it. He advised the camel driver to instead focus on the present and improve on it. If he can improve the now, then the future that will follow would be good. He also said that only God was the will to allow men to see the future. The camel driver advised Santiago to warn the tribal chieftains. Heeding his advice, Santiago approached the great white tent in the middle of the oasis. When he entered, he was stunned by what he saw. The floors were covered in beautiful carpets, and lamps of gold hung all around. One of the chieftains then spoke to him, and Santiago encountered what he saw. At first, they were skeptical of his news. After all, there was an unspoken rule in the desert. Oases were neutral territories, and therefore do not get involved in tribal wars. The chieftains finally decided that they will prepare for the invasion and that Santiago would be rewarded with gold. But should nothing happen, Santiago would pay with his life. Santiago was terrified, but he knew what he saw was a true omen. He left the tent deep in thought when a man atop a horse stopped just in front of him and pointed a sword to his head. The man was veiled and dressed in black. Santiago thought he was a Bedouin, but this man looked too powerful to be a mere messenger. The man asked him about the omens, and Santiago replied he saw what the heavens wanted. Strangely, Santiago was not afraid. Should he die at that moment, he would do so happily. He would have died in pursuit of his personal legend, and furthermore, he had the chance to meet Fatima. The strange man then sheathed his sword and said that he needed to see if Santiago had courage, for it was courage that would help man understand the language of the world. Santiago was astonished by what he heard. The man instructed Santiago to meet him the next day and turned to leave. Before he left, Santiago asked where the man lived. With his whip, he pointed south and galloped away. Santiago had met the alchemist. The next day, armed men were scattered around the oasis to await the invasion. As predicted, 500 tribesmen arrived under the pretense of peaceful expedition. However, when they reached the white tent where the chieftains resided, they drew out their rifles and attacked an empty net. The men of the oasis surrounded them, and in no time, the tribesmen were defeated. Santiago was rewarded with gold as promised, and the tribal chieftains asked him to become the counselor of the oasis. Later that day, Santiago headed south to meet the alchemist. He waited for a few minutes before the alchemist arrived. He was carrying 2 dead hawks, which he said would be their dinner. The alchemist advised Santiago that he needed to continue with his journey to the pyramids. He explained that the omens have told him of his arrival and that Santiago would be needing his help. He then asked that Santiago trade his camel for a horse. He explained that camels were treacherous because they do not show exhaustion and may seem fine, but one day they just fall over and die, whereas horses tire faster. Therefore, Santiago would be able to know until when the horse can serve him. The next day, they set off to the desert, and to test Santiago further, the alchemist asked him to find life there. Santiago let his horse lead the way, and sure enough, they came across a hole. The alchemist reached inside and suddenly pulled out a live cobra. The alchemist was satisfied by the omen and declared that he would guide Santiago across the desert. Santiago argued that he need not go to the pyramids because he had found Fatima. Therefore, the alchemist explained what would happen if he were to stay and abandon his personal legend. According to the alchemist, if he stayed, he would become the counselor of the oasis. He would become wealthy, and Fatima would be happy for a year. He added that the omens would continue to come to him. However, on the second year, the omens would incessantly remind him of the treasure, but he would dismiss them. By the third year, Santiago will think of nothing else but the treasure, and he would regret not having pursued it. Fatima would also be unhappy and blame herself for making Santiago abandon his personal legend. In the fourth year, the omens will no longer come to Santiago, and he will lose his position as counselor. However, he would still be rich and will spend the rest of his days in luxury. However, for the remainder of his days, thoughts of the treasure would plague him, and by then it would be too late. The alchemist added that true love would encourage a man to pursue his personal legend. If love, however, made one abandon it, it wasn't true. Santiago and the alchemist agreed to start their journey in the morning, 2 hours before they were to depart. Santiago went to find Fatima and say goodbye. Fatima was sad to see him go, but held on to his promise that he would come back for her. When Santiago and the alchemist set off, once again, the alchemist reminded him not to dwell on what he had left behind. The alchemist had a companion, a falcon, who left and hunted for game. It would return with rabbits or birds, which they would eat for dinner or lunch. At night, they would ensure that their fires were well concealed so they wouldn't attract attention. Before long, the wind began carrying the smell of blood. Santiago knew they were in dangerous territory. Days passed in silence, and one day the alchemist remarked that they were nearing the pyramids. Santiago was disappointed that he had not learned anything new from his companion. The alchemist told him about alchemy and that the people who can achieve the master work are the people who value and embody the science and philosophy behind it. He said that most people fail because their end goal is the gold. The alchemist ended that the emerald tablet contains the secret in understanding the language and the soul of the world, and in order to do this, one must listen to their heart. Santiago one day revealed that his heart doesn't want him to continue with the journey, which the alchemist understood. He explained that the heart was afraid that it might lose everything it has gained so far, and said that the heart can be treasonous, so Santiago must listen well and overcome the fear. Santiago and the alchemist were stopped by some warriors who searched their belongings. From the alchemist, they retrieved a flask and a yellow egg-shaped glass. They inquired what it was, and the alchemist told them the truth. It was the elixir of life and the philosopher's stone. The men laughed at this answer, and thinking them harmless, allowed them to pass. Later, the alchemist explained to Santiago that one of the ironies in life is when you show people the treasures you possess, yet they refuse to believe it. They journeyed on, and a lost danger befell them. Santiago and the alchemist were taken captive by blue-garbed warriors. They thought that Santiago and the alchemist were spies. To buy some time, the alchemist took Santiago's hard-earned money and offered it to the leader. In a convincing tone, he said that Santiago had the ability to turn himself into the wind. The leader was intrigued and gave him 3 days to prepare. Santiago was stunned, and in the days that followed, his panic grew. However, the alchemist advised that he will be able to do it if he just learned to listen to his heart and what the world was trying to tell him. On the 3rd day, everyone gathered to watch Santiago turn into the wind. They had chosen a cliff as a location to watch this miracle so they can get a good view of Santiago. Somehow, Santiago knew in his heart what to do. He closed his eyes and spoke with the wind. The wind answered back and was intrigued by Santiago's story, but unfortunately, it did not know how to turn him into the wind. Therefore, the wind told Santiago to ask the sun. The sun, however, did not know as well. The wind blew harder and harder around Santiago, excited to learn that the sun was not as wise as it had thought. The sun advised Santiago to ask the heavens for help. However, Santiago could not look at the sky because he was blinded by the sun's brightness, so he asked the wind to blow harder so the sand can blot out the sun. The wind did as he was told, eager to see it for itself how a boy can become the wind. The warriors grew scared when the wind picked up and gained more strength. All around they were moving restlessly, trying to shield themselves from objects that were flying around and from the sand that were twiddling furiously around them. The alchemist smiled as he saw what Santiago was doing. He had found the perfect disciple. The leader of the tribe was amazed because he knew that what he was seeing is the glory of God. When everything calmed down, the tribesmen set them free, and the leader paid them his respects. Santiago and the alchemist continued their journey and reached a monastery. There the alchemist showed Santiago how to turn lead into gold. All he did was get a silver, about a hair's breadth, from the yellow glass egg, and dropped it into the pan where the lead was heating. Santiago was astonished to see that lead turning to gold. Once cooled, the alchemist broke the gold into 3 parts. He gave one to Santiago to repay the gold he had offered to the tribesmen, one to the monk for them to use the monastery, and the 3rd part he asked the monk to keep safe for Santiago's return. Santiago was perplexed by this and said he already had more than enough gold already. The alchemist merely chuckled and said that unfortunate things sometimes had a habit of occurring again. He then told Santiago that they must now part ways, and Santiago was to achieve his personal legend by himself. Just like the old king, the alchemist told him a story before they parted ways. There was a man who had 2 sons. One had chosen to be in the military, while the other decided to be a poet. One night the man had a dream that his son's words would be immortalized and will move so many people. The man awoke with great pride and was grateful to know that his son's decision to become a poet would now bear fruit. One day, while trying to save a child from being run over by a chariot, the man died. As he had a kind heart, he went to heaven and the angels granted him a wish. The man asked to be taken to the time when his son's word would be heard and repeated by many. The angel granted his wish and took him to a place where a large crowd had gathered. However, the man was surprised to see that it was not his son who recited beautiful poems that he was hearing, but that of his son in the military. His son was just and kind and would be remembered by many as the person who said, "My Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only speak a word and my servant will be healed." The alchemist said that people often play a central role in the history of the world, but sometimes they do not even know it. With that, the alchemist said goodbye and went on his way. Santiago journeyed alone for the rest of the way, and at last reached the pyramids. He climbed the dunes. Upon reaching the top, was engulfed with immense joy and relief. He was moved by the moment to tears that ran down his face. He thanked gods and the omen that the people he had put his way to help him realize his dream. On the spot where his tears fell, a scarab popped out. Santiago knew this was another omen to begin to dig. He dug and dug until night fell, but Santiago found nothing. However, he was not disheartened and continued digging. He kept at it until he heard voices above him. They were thieves. The men robbed Santiago of his gold, and suspicious of his digging, demanded that he continue because they thought that he must have hidden something valuable in the sand. However, by sunrise, no gold or money was in sight. Frustrated, they beat Santiago until he bled. Desperate to be freed, Santiago revealed that he was looking for treasure because he had a dream that he would find it here. The leader of the thieves took pity on him and asked his companions to let Santiago go. Before they left, the leader came back and told Santiago that he, too, once had a recurring dream. He dreamt of a hidden treasure under the altar of a destroyed church where a tall sycamore tree grew. When they left, Santiago stood up, his heart bursting with joy. He now knew where his treasure was. Santiago journeyed back to Andalusia and reached the church he once slept in when he had been a shepherd. However, this time, instead of his sheep, all he had was a shovel. As he dug, he asked the heavens why he had to go through so much to find the treasure, and recalled how the monk had laughed at him when he went back to the monastery injured and with his clothes barely hanging on his back. A voice then answered that Santiago would have never seen the beauty of the pyramids if he hadn't made his journey. The boy laughed, and soon his shovel hit something hard. It was a chest. Santiago unearthed it and opened the box. His eye widened in astonishment when he saw heaps of Spanish gold coins and dazzling jewelries. Pursuing and achieving one's personal legend was indeed rewarding and fulfilling, and Santiago had never felt happier. Just then, the wind blew, bringing with it the scent of the desert and the woman he loved. Santiago smiled and left. It was now time to return to Fatima. The Alchemist is an inspiring story that is so simply written that makes the story more compelling and heartfelt. The hero, Santiago, is an ordinary boy with humble origins who bravely pursues his personal legends despite the trials and setbacks he faces along the way. He sacrifices everything he has for the unknown, letting only his courage and faith guide him. The Alchemist imparts a lot of important lessons. It tells of the hindrances that most of us face when pursuing a dream. Moreover, with every failure, we begin to ask, is it worth it? The harder we fall, the more discouraged we become. The Alchemist tells us that trials are necessary, not to dishearten us, but to test us and mold us so we become stronger and wiser. The difficult experiences equipped us with the knowledge and courage to go further and to reach our goal. This happened to Santiago when he was robbed just as he had reached Africa. He was left with nothing but the clothes on his back. Santiago was disheartened, but he found a way to recover and even double the money he lost. When he had more than enough to go home and to buy twice the amount of sheep he had previously had, he realized that he needed to continue his journey and find the treasure that he had repeatedly dreamt about. He could always go back to being a shepherd after all. The other obstacle that we often face is love. Love for our family and our friends. The Alchemist shows us how Santiago nearly gave up pursuing his personal legend because he had met the woman meant for him. Everything else had paled in comparison. However, the Alchemist teaches us that love is considered true if it encourages us to pursue our personal legend, because it should be a stimulus and not a hindrance. Love that is false is the kind that makes us attached, and thus makes us abandon the pursuit of it. One of the other hindrances that the Alchemist shows us is sympathy towards our fellow human beings, the people who are not able to pursue their personal legends. Because of this, it sometimes invokes intense sympathy in us that we begin to feel guilty. We begin to feel unworthy of such a dream. As such, we begin to feel that for the good of everybody else, we should sacrifice our desire because it makes us selfish. This, according to the author, is the most dangerous obstacle there is because it deceives us into thinking that what we are doing is for the good of our families and loved ones. Finally, and most importantly, the alchemist also shows us that God works in mysterious ways and often peppers our paths with omens and sends people to aid us in achieving our personal legends. He is doing this because he deems us worthy of something fulfilling and because we deserve to feel immense happiness. Most of all, it's because he knows that the experience will help us grow and become better people than we were before.